We're really on a threshold of a new venture, taking us back, way back to 1947. I remember standing outside the college property here. It was a haunted castle, but it became the heart and hub of our movement, and I believe one of the real secrets of how God equipped us and used us as a movement. And yes, we've come to love this place where we're located now, 13 to 21 South Street. But God has opened up another opportunity, a brand new opportunity to start from scratch. I'm glad I'm not in that generation. It's yours, folks. You're welcome to it. But this is a great venture, and in God's providence, steering us through our doubts and mistakes and problems, there is an opportunity for a great new beginning for the church, I believe. And our prayer is that this will be glorifying to God and an effective move for the future.
During World War II, many Christians became aware of the great spiritual needs of the Australian people and prayed for an awakening such as that which changed England 2 centuries before. Reverend Kingsley M. Ridgway, an Australian who'd served as a missionary to Egypt with a Canadian Holiness Church prior to the Second World War and as an RAAF chaplain during the war, learned of the Wesleyan Methodist Church of America's commitment to early Methodist priorities and wrote to them for information. After careful study of their documents, he concluded, "This is exactly what we believe, and the requirements of its handbooks are based on the scriptures throughout." With this confirmation, on the 1st of November 1945, Reverend Kingsley Ridgway became the official representative of the Wesleyan Methodist Church in Australia. Kingsley's passion for evangelism and holiness quickly drew other notable leaders together. On the 29th of April 1946, a prayer and information meeting for the Wesleyan Methodist Church of Australia took place in Monbulk, Victoria. At this meeting, Kingsley received founding members and a new church was born. At this first minuted meeting, it was noted that after much prayer, we became convinced that God called for the rebirth of holiness teaching as enunciated by John Wesley. A number of names still present in the church today first appeared in the records of those first 2 years. Mr. John Thomas Carnell, later to be ordained, and members of his family were present in July 1946 at the Elizabeth Street meetings. J.T. was the father of Aubrey and Gwen, both of whom played major roles in the developing church. Reverend Dr. Aubrey Carnell was to become the longest-serving Australian leader of the Wesleyan Methodist Church in Australia and the father of Graham and Dennis Carnell. The young Jim Ridgway, son of Kingsley Ridgway and later to be National Superintendent during our period of strongest growth, took membership in August 1946 at the Elizabeth Street meetings. 2 of Dr. James Ridgway's children still serve the Wesleyan Methodist Church today, Reverend Kent Ridgway and Mrs. Karen Hodgkin, and one of his grandsons serves, Pastor Dean Ridgway. Mr. Lindsay Enderby, uncle of the long-serving North Queensland pastor of the same name, took membership at the Noon Street Mission on June 1946. An organising session for the new conference was held at the Elizabeth Street headquarters on the 7th of April 1947, at which time Reverend Kingsley Ridgway was elected conference president and commissioned to represent the new mission at the United States General Conference. In November 1947, 2 years after Kingsley's first commissioning, the first annual conference was held at the Labour Hall, Severn Street in Yarraville. This historic conference was chaired by Reverend J.R. Swager, American General Secretary of Home Missions. The conference received reports and elected church officers. A board of trustees was elected, and the purchase of Hunting Tower on South Street, Glenroy was approved. The Glenroy property was destined to become the heart of the Australian Church, serving as the campus for the Bible College for 60 years and the site of the national headquarters and annual conferences for more than 3 decades. The early work began with tent meetings at Essendon and Ascot Vale in 1945 and 1946. The initial work progressed to the establishment of 4 churches: Moonee Ponds, which relocated to Carlton and then to West Coburg; Yarraville, which relocated to East Sunshine; Bendigo, and Kahuna. Sadly, the church at Bendigo was closed in 1949 after just 3 years. This was something of an irony, given that Bendigo was the first location where a church building was purchased. However, the Coburg, Sunshine and Kahuna congregations continued and were joined by congregations at Balwyn, Hyatt and at the Bible College. These congregations were to be the anchor for the fledgling work for the next decade. There were several distinctive features of the ministry in Victoria in the 1950s and 60s. There was a strong emphasis on ministry to children. There was a consistent commitment to annual district-wide camp meetings. There was a growing emphasis on mission work. The tent which had been used to found the early work was returned to service for children's ministry, attracting more than 300 children at meetings in Glenroy. The first annual camp meeting was held at Barwon Heads in the last days of 1946, spanning an extraordinary 9-day period, including Christmas Day and New Year's Day. Camp meetings were considered a central strategy in the growth of the movement and the spread of the holiness message. Many people responded to Christ and deepened their spiritual lives at these annual events. After Barwon Heads, the annual camp meetings were relocated to Healesville, first at rented premises and later at our own property. In 1961, the small Australian work took the bold step to establish a missionary work in Papua New Guinea. Reverend Kingsley Ridgway, with college graduate Walter Hodgkin, moved to the Southern Highlands to establish the beachhead. Kingsley and Jean, with Walter and Dorothy, were quickly joined by Ray and Gwen Akers, Bob and Jan Gladwin, Graham and Gwen Kershaw, Keith and Marge Golding, Francis Leake, Delwyn Hughes and Marge Randall, together with other North American personnel. The work amongst the Huli people was expanded to include work amongst the Weirdu and the Polabar tribes. In the early 1970s, at its peak, staff assigned to the PNG mission outnumbered pastoral staff in the Australian Church. A significant thread in the life of the denomination was the establishment of the Bible College. This was especially important as a means of upholding the integrity of the Scriptures and promoting the doctrine of entire sanctification. In March 1949, with the arrival of missionary Reverend Leo Cox and his family, the Wesleyan Methodist Bible College commenced on a full-time residential basis with 7 students at the 2-storey building in South Street.
Greetings to my dear brothers and sisters in Australia. It's a joy to come to you in this matter and bring the message which I am. It has been a joy to think of you a number of times, often pray for you, and rejoice for the victories that God has given to you in that land. We are very happy to rejoice with you in the plans that you have for your future get-together, and may it be a blessed time for you as you meet together. I'd like to recognize some of the important persons that came into my life in Australia. I think first of Reverend K.M. Ridgway, a man of God, chosen of the Lord, who came into the experience of holiness and wanted to have that message proclaimed in the land of Australia. He was a man that God certainly used and blessed during those first 2 years before we came onto the field, and he was planning for the work that was to come on later on. So I do honor and lift my voice in thanksgiving to God for the wonderful help that Dr. K.M. Ridgway gave, not only in those early years, throughout the time that we were there and even following until his death at a later date. We do rejoice also for the other workers. I think of Aubrey Carnell, a young man at the time we came, learning to prepare for the ministry. We helped him in some of the courses, and it was a real joy to work with him and with his wife. And we have many times thought of them and the work that they have done through the years. And also, not only their influence upon the work, but probably the man that stands out is Jim Ridgway, who was a student in my classes for 4 years. I helped him to establish his theology, and he became a leader for you that God used through the years, and we do rejoice for the great work that he has done, not only while we were there, but during the many years involved in the leadership that he gave to the work.
The Bible College at Glenroy was a central pillar in the strategy of the new work, and a number of early leaders were trained there during the first decades, including Dr. James Ridgway, Reverend Graham Carnell, Reverend Tom Blythe, and Reverend Dennis Harton. Establishing a college was not without difficulty, though. In 1969, classes at the college were suspended and the property was closed off until James Ridgway, fresh from doctoral studies in the United States, returned in January 1972 to take up the role of principal. In 1973, with new life on the campus, the name of the college was changed to Kingsley College in honour of the founder, Kingsley Ridgway. The roles of college principal and conference president were commonly held by the same person. Kingsley Ridgway was himself the first principal of the college while serving as conference president. Reverend Leo Cox with his family arrived on November 11, 1948 to serve as principal and as conference president, holding both offices until his term in Australia expired in 1953. Reverend Robert Motke and his family were sent by the American Church to replace the Coxes. He brought a new vision in the leadership of the work, also serving as principal of the Bible College and as conference president. The Motkes spent 7 years in Australia.
We have fond memories of our days in Australia, and we thank you for allowing us to be a part of your lives years, and we made many memories that we have carried in our minds ever since, and they're good memories, and we're very grateful for them. We have used the benefits of our experience in Australia for many years since we were there, and it doesn't seem possible that we left your shores in 1961. The years have slipped by very quickly. Jeanette has wants an opportunity to greet you as well.
Yes, I do like to say hello to everyone. I too have very wonderful memories of Australia, and I want to thank everyone who may have been there when we were there. Thank you for your patience for putting up with sort of a young, ignorant gal from the States. And you loved me, and I appreciate it so much.
Following the return of the Motkes to USA, leadership in Australia was directed through Australian personnel. Indeed, the movement was blessed with a number of gifted and faithful leaders during these foundational years. Reverend Aubrey Carnell served the Bible College as Dean and as Vice Principal, and served the denomination as Superintendent from 1962 to 1969, and again from 1970 to 1975. Reverend Bryce Harton, a highly esteemed itinerant evangelist, served as superintendent in 1969 through to 1970, while Reverend Carnell filled in as acting college principal. The denomination, which started as a handful of churches in Victoria in 1946, grew to number 12 churches scattered across Victoria and reaching into Launceston in Tasmania, Elizabeth in Adelaide, and Busby in Sydney. The early 1970s, however, brought a very difficult time with numerous setbacks. These setbacks included the loss of the South Australian and Tasmanian churches. In 1974, the gains had been reversed to the extent that the conference reported only 6 churches remaining. However, God was preparing this Holiness Church for a new era of growth.
You know, I thank the Lord for the tremendous privilege that I've had over these years to belong to the Wesleyan Methodist Church, where they've allowed me to preach to the congregation that Jesus Christ saves and sanctifies, that he provides cleansing from sin, purity of hearts and mind. And Paul is saying here, finally, brethren, be perfect. And I think he had the heart of a pastor when he saw that Christian congregation. He saw some of their inconsistencies. He saw some of their failures. And he said, oh, I just long for you to be of one mind, to be perfect. To live in peace. And my exhortation to you this morning, friends, that as I leave the pastorate in an official capacity, let my last word be to you finally, brethren, that means sisters as well, of course, go on to perfection. Go on to an experience of allowing Jesus Christ to take full possession of your heart and life. Surrender your will to him. Allow him to do whatever he wants to do in your life. Don't put up any barriers. Say, Lord, whatever you want me to do, I'm ready to obey you fully. This is the will of God, even your sanctification.
In the late 1970s and 1980s, a wave of new leadership entered the Wesleyan Methodist Church. This came about as evangelicals exited the former Methodist Church as it merged into the Uniting Church. These new leaders brought fresh energy and zeal for the Scriptures and the message of holiness. The denomination entered into a season of extraordinary growth, from 6 churches to 82 churches over the next 23 years. Churches were planted in Queensland, New South Wales, Victoria and South Australia, with false starts in Tasmania, Western Australia and the Australian Capital Territory. The pioneering of the church in Queensland and its subsequent growth is worthy of special mention. Reverend Don Hargrave, a young Methodist minister deeply committed to a revival of true Methodist witness, joined the Wesleyan Methodist Church and was involved in the planting of over 30 churches. During much of this time, Reverend Hargrave served under the national leadership of Dr. James Ridgway. They proved to be an effective team. And the passion for church planting was contagious, with a number of other pastors from across the districts involved in multiple church plants. These included John Falatau, Dallas Clarnett, David Brownless, Tom Blythe, Harry Hurlar, Bill Foster, Sifa Lokatui, Bert Bunny and Phil Hodgkin.
My affirmation, which I use in my quiet time, begins, there is a dream in the heart of God for my nation in my lifetime, a mighty spiritual awakening that will touch the world. I still live for that dream. That was the reason why I believe God allowed me the privilege of serving within the Wesleyans and preaching the message of holiness, which I still preach whenever I have the opportunity. I believe that the message of holiness is the hope of our world, and quite specifically the hope of our nation. And I believe that God raised up the Wesleyan Church as a vehicle through whom that message could be faithfully declared and lived. and I'm so glad to have had the privilege of ministry for 26 years and continuing to have opportunities of ministry which I celebrate. I celebrate the way in which God has given you leaders I can believe in and pray with and pray for. I celebrate the way He's provided this new facility and this new chapter, and I pray that God's good hand will not just be upon the movement for such a time as this, but for the days until Jesus comes again. And as we see our nation, this great south land of the Holy Spirit, turned around and again an instrument in His hands to change our world. God bless you.
By 1982, the denomination had developed to the point where it became necessary to divide the church into 3 districts under the structure of a multi-district Australian conference. This structure was approved in 1982, made up of the Victorian, Queensland and New South Wales districts. Each district held an annual district conference, and the national conference was held biennially. Dr. James Ridgway was appointed the first national superintendent and continued in this position until December 1984. Dr. Don Hardgrave succeeded Dr. Ridgway as national superintendent, serving until May 1987, at which time he stepped down to concentrate on district leadership and church planting. He was succeeded by Reverend Thomas J. Blythe, having served as a church planter and district superintendent in the New South Wales district. Tom brought a burden for holiness revival, administrative gifts, and passionate preaching to the position. During Reverend Blythe's term of leadership, the denomination matured and developed, adopting its own handbook and opening a 4th district in North Queensland under the leadership of a college graduate, Lindsay Cameron. During Reverend Blythe's term of leadership, a growing number of South Pacific and Asian congregations began to join the Wesleyan Methodist Church. The increase of Tongan congregations in Victoria, New South Wales and South East Queensland was especially influential in the denomination's expansion. By 2010, services were being conducted to cater to Tongan, Fijian, Samoan, Chinese, Korean and Indigenous congregations.
I'm pleased to greet the Wesleyan family on this time of celebration and transition. I give praise to God for the vision that formed and founded Kingsley College and for the dedication that nurtured it over all the years that we have known it. I trust that its passion will be rekindled in the new facility. This year marks 50 years since I first joined the Wesleyan Methodist Church, and I thank God that it gave me an avenue to serve my Lord in various ways. My first passion was church planting, and God blessed us in Coffs Harbour and then in Sydney, in the Hills District, in Bankstown and in Pittwater. I never really sought leadership, but it seemed to come my way. And it was a particular privilege to serve the National Church for 10 years, and this was a time of great blessing and challenge. This culminated in the celebration of our denominational Jubilee in 1997. Eleanor joins me now at this time in extending our warmest wishes and to the wider Wesleyan family. Thanks for the memories.
In January 1997, Reverend Blythe was succeeded by Reverend Stanley Baker. Reverend Baker's stature as a statesman and his strong pastoral gifts brought a time of soothing to the denomination, now stretched through growth. A number of significant events occurred during Reverend Baker's decade of leadership. 2 highlights of this era illustrate the maturing of the denomination. The Australian Church took on an increasingly significant role in the South Pacific region and in the international church. Missionary work was undertaken in Bougainville and the Solomon Islands, personnel were sent to Mozambique, and a new Wesleyan Methodist group was fostered in New Zealand. The second significant influence of this decade was in membership regulations. the Australian Church undertook a substantial review of membership structures, making a bold move away from North American regulations to a principle-based discipleship model of membership. Sadly, Reverend Stan Baker passed away in August 2010, less than 3 years after retiring as National Superintendent. Just days before his death, Stan recorded these words for the Church.
Greetings to all those who are gathered at Kingsley College for a day of celebration of the past and anticipation of the future. I have fond memories of Kingsley, firstly as a student for a brief time, and then many times as a visitor. How I wish I could wind back the clock to a time when students were buzzing around the campus. But time marches on and technology races on, and the expectation of students has changed dramatically. May this new facility, as it is developed, provide for the delivery of courses from Kingsley College to a new generation of students. God bless you all.
In January 2008, I was elected to succeed Stan Baker as National Superintendent, having just returned to Australia after missionary service in Africa. I was converted under the ministry of Stan Baker myself. I was called to ministry under the time of leadership of Don Hargrave, and I was appointed as District Superintendent of North Queensland during the time of Tom Blythe's leadership. So I've been in the church during the time of major growth and the becoming of who we are today. So this is an exciting opportunity for us as we make the transition from the old Glenroy property to the new property on Lakeside Drive. In the meantime, together with the National Board of Administration, we've called the church back to our traditional values of an undivided heart, of prayer and fasting, and of community engagement. Time will tell how God blesses us as we move ahead into this new era of growth. In the 1980s and the 1990s, Kingsley College grew to see its best years. Dr. David Wilson succeeded Dr. James Ridgway as principal, serving for 18 years from 1985 to 2002. Many of the Australian pastors today trained at Kingsley during the term of Dr. Wilson's leadership, and the college expanded to offer postgraduate credentials. Dr. Wilson was succeeded by Reverend Lionel Rose during the time of transition in 2003, and he was succeeded by Reverend Peter Dobson from 2004 to 2009. Reverend Dobson led through a time of far-reaching change because of demanding government regulations and shifting community expectations. This culminated in the enormous and difficult decision at the National Conference in 2008 to approve the sale of the old Glenroy campus and to relinquish our own accredited study program. God has led us through this transition though, and today we celebrate Kingsley College's renewed role in ministerial training through the emergence of the vocational education stream. Reverend Kevin Brown succeeded Reverend Dobson as principal in 2010, and under his leadership the vocational education program has been extended to include more Wesleyan Methodist students than ever before. The purchase and establishment of a new Melbourne campus on the picturesque Lakeside Drive promises to serve Kingsley College and the National Church as a base for a new era of expansion. Meanwhile, the National Board is pursuing the placement of campuses in other critical population centres in Australia as well. At the commencement of 2011, the Wesleyan Methodist Church of Australia has churches in 7 states and territories, with missionary presence in 3 countries. We are multicultural, focused upon our message, and committed to growth. Furthermore, we are part of an international family that gives and receives support. With the support of the North American Church, we were able to purchase the original Glenroy campus. We were empowered to plant churches and operate a college, and we have partnered in outreach across the South Pacific and around the globe. Our victory today is truly an international celebration. Today, as we celebrate 63 years on the South Street property, and as we dedicate the new Lakeside Drive property, we are challenged to remember our reason for existing. The Wesleyan Methodist Church has a mandate to spread scriptural holiness. Together with Reverend Kingsley Ridgway and those who went before us, today we are more and more firmly convinced that what is needed is a holiness church. May God grant us faithfulness and fruitfulness in fulfilling our calling.
Good morning, folks, or afternoon, whichever it is. I've been privileged to serve in the Wesleyan Church now for 58 years. I believe we're part of a vine that God has planted in Australia. This vine came not from schism, but from a passion to offer the saving, sanctifying, sustaining grace of God to Australia and our neighbours. I believe we owe a great debt to our heritage, to the American Wesleyan Church. They have stood behind us and shaped in many, many ways our vision, and have supplied us with a wonderful team of supporters and workers down through the years. We could never have accomplished what we have seen apart from that liaison. I've witnessed God's unfolding plan over 63 years now, which doesn't seem very long to me. It may seem a long time to you. Our influence as a people has reached around Australia and over the seas to PNG, to Bougainville, the Solomons, Sri Lanka, Africa, Haiti, and through Wesleyan World Fellowship, World Missions, and through almost every mission society, our graduates are serving and have served around the world. The college has been a key factor in this expansion. Through all of this, I've been encouraged and challenged by God's Word. I've been encouraged by our heritage. I've been encouraged by our commitments as a movement, and I've been encouraged by the models of godliness that I have personally experienced at home here and around the churches in the US and Canada particularly. Folks, we are privileged to be part of this family. This is a family. It's part of God's great family. God is no man's debtor. That's the message we need to keep in mind. I'd like to commend Romans 12 to you who meet today. If we live by the light of Romans 12, I believe we will be the living epistles known and read of all men, which we need to be in our generation. So read Romans 12. Take time to read it during this assembly and be saturated in it. I really believe that will be a great encouragement.